Good morning. My name is Dan Carey. I am Secretary of the Royal Irish Academy. You're very welcome. Today, we're going to be discussing the future of AI in education. No greater issue, and then the response to this has been enormous, suggesting how much we all realize we have at stake in this question. The event was programmed and organized by a working group comprised of two of the Royal Irish Academy's multidisciplinary committees, the Engineering and Computer Sciences Committee, and the Languages, Literature, Culture, and Communications Committee. As Secretary of the Academy, I have responsibility for these multidisciplinary committees and to oversee their work. They provide scientific and scholarly expertise to the Academy. They consist of members and non-members of the Academy, so we have a very, very significant reach into the academic and scholarly and learned community. And we advise on the Academy's public events program. We propose and organize events, and we engage with pressing issues, for example, today's, and topics related to the various disciplines. Now, membership of these multidisciplinary committees changes in 2026, and there will be a call for applications for those who wish to participate in them in January 2026. So if anybody in the room is interested in participating, you should sign up for our newsletter and you'll find out all about the announcements and you can take part. As I say, I want to welcome you. It's great to see this collaboration between these two different parts of the Academy, the sciences and the humanities and social sciences coming together. That we very much benefit from those kind of interdisciplinary conversations taking place, and no better topic on which to do so than artificial intelligence. I want to take a moment to acknowledge the support of the conference partners, and you see their posters here, the Insight Research Ireland Centre for Data Analytics and the Adapt Research Ireland Centre for AI-driven digital content. We're very grateful to them for their sponsorship of the conference. Artificial intelligence, you don't need me to tell you this, is permeating every level of society, and it's very fitting in that sense that the Academy would engage in discussion and try to contribute expertise and to foster public conversation about this. The conference is going to allow us a chance to have to build on what was a very successful Royal Irish Academy discourse series. This is a series of 6 lectures that we convene each year. We had a theme last year, which was artificial intelligence, and a report is shortly to be published on that. The recordings are also available if you wish to go back and look at them, and they span various different aspects of artificial intelligence. So the idea is that we would come back to it, having recognized that AI in education was really crucial to all of these issues, and we felt that it really needed further discussion and reflection. We have a wonderful keynote speaker, and we have 2 fantastic panels ahead of us, and before that, a very special guest speaker. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce Deputy Malcolm Byrne, who is Chair of the Oireachtas Committee on Artificial Intelligence. He's going to present some opening remarks for today's conference. So thank you, and over to you, Deputy Byrne.
Thank you very much, Dan, and indeed all at the Royal Irish Academy for this very important event, but also the RIA's ongoing commitment to contributing to public debate around issues such as artificial intelligence. It's very important that those who are engaged in research in our universities and the business community, that they do contribute towards societal debates. And I would certainly argue, unsurprisingly, being chair of the Oireachtas Committee on Artificial Intelligence, that AI is one of those big public debates. It's one of those major opportunities for society, but also it has enormous challenges. This morning, what I want to, and I do want to acknowledge as well, the support of both the Insight and Adapt centres and indeed the work of Research Ireland in this space. This morning, what I just briefly want to do and to wish this morning's discussion as well is to talk about the government policy, how we led to the AI committee being set up, how that's looking to influence the state's approach to artificial intelligence, to maybe then talk about the state's policy approach and what that is. And then finally, maybe just rather than trying to provide answers, which certainly a politician can't always do, but to throw out a few questions that we might think to be of use. So during the course of the last Oireachtas, people will be familiar that the government decided to appoint an AI ambassador, Dr. Patricia Scanlon, to start to discuss some of the issues around AI and to set up an independent advisory council. There were over 400 applications to join that advisory council, and that comprises representatives from business, from academia, from law, and who are able to contribute independent advice to government on where we should be going with AI and indeed with other technologies. We came then to the general election, and after it, when the new government was being formed, the programme for government was drawn up. And if you put the programme for government, current programme for government, into any large language model and compare it to the previous programme for government, you will see a lot more emphasis on AI and digitalization and the possibilities of emerging technologies and how they can contribute both to the delivery of more efficient services by the state, but also looking at how Ireland can lead in the AI space. So a Minister for Artificial Intelligence, Niamh Smith, was appointed. She was appointed as Junior Minister at the Department of Enterprise. There is maybe a bit of debate over, given how overarching AI is, whether that junior ministry should be at the Department of Taoiseach rather than Enterprise, but the decision was made. And there was certainly some discussion, because a number of us had been advocating for a very specific committee around artificial intelligence to be set up in Leinster House. The purpose of that committee, as it is now, is to lead public debate, but to inform government policy and government thinking around the challenges and opportunities that AI may present. The idea behind the committee, is not most committees, as you know, Oireachtas committees go away, do their work for a number of years, come out with a very worthy report. Some of the recommendations are accepted, some are not. Because this technology is moving so quickly, that's not the intention of how this committee will work. It's going to be a rolling series of meetings with a view to teasing out some of the issues and looking at where we can influence government policy. It wasn't clear at the start of the term as to whether or not the committee would actually be established. I am crediting Emmanuel Macron for getting it established, because the Taoiseach, Micheál Martin, went to the AI Summit in Paris in February, and he came back with the zeal of a convert. He was always very interested in the topic, but literally came back and insisted it had to be set up. And at one of our parliamentary party meetings, where he was talking about AI being the next industrial revolution and so on, one of my colleagues, knowing of my interest, WhatsApped me during the meeting and said, "Jesus, will you ever get Micheál to stop going on all about that A1 stuff that you keep talking about?" But our committee has now been set up and running. It's a cross-party committee comprising 14 TDs and senators. And the way we have decided to operate is, some of you may have seen, and there was a presentation by Taoiseach Research Ireland before the summer. Before the summer, we kind of had a state of the nation as to where Ireland is at the moment. And how we have now decided to move forward is we're going to be operating in modules, starting with AI and the state, looking at how the state itself uses AI, but then moving into areas like AI and healthcare, AI and energy, and indeed AI and education, to which I'll come in just a moment. We're actually doing 3 opening sessions, though, over the next week or two, which are kind of overarching. And I will unfortunately have to leave slightly early today to go to the first of those, which is on the theme of AI and children and young people, where we will be hearing from a number of children and young people, as well as children and young people's organizations, about the hopes and opportunities of those generations with regard to that new technology. Our next overarching session is on AI and older people, to hear similar views, and then AI and disability. And indeed, I've been fascinated by some of the AI applications in terms of those who are visually impaired, but I think it's going to be a really interesting engagement. But our entire purpose is about realizing the potential of this technology to improve the lives of citizens and those who are resident here. For anybody, and we are keen to hear submissions or views, or if during any of the public hearings And we particularly say to those in the research community who have something to contribute on any of the issues that come up, ai@oireachtas.ie is our email. We are keen to hear views. And I do put out a challenge to those who are engaging in research in this space. And this is certainly something the RIA has been to the fore about doing. Contribute to public debate. None of us are experts in this space. I mean, I would love to know, where are we going to be with AI in 2 years? If somebody can predict that, I'll happily buy shares in their company. But we're hearing predictions on everything from we will have artificial general intelligence in 2 years to this is a load of hype and it's going to disappear. I generally subscribe to the view that a lot of new technologies, they tend to be overhyped in the short term and underestimated in the long term. And our role has to really be to prepare where can Ireland best position ourselves as an AI island for the long term. In terms of government policy approach, and I think this, I sum it up quite often, that policy approach, whether it's by the state or indeed in education, there tends to be 3 responses. Let's ban it. This is a new technology. It's going to be an enormous threat. It's a huge danger. I was even conscious of an article from Trinity academics suggesting along those lines recently. I reject that approach simply because the technology is going to move on anyway. The second approach tends to be there's something here, but let's step back and let's see what other countries are doing. Estonia's doing this and this is happening in Australia. Let's see what they do and we learn from it. The danger is that we tend to be bypassed, that those countries who are early adapters move on quickly. And the final approach is let's go for it. But let's put the guardrails in place. Let's have the debate. And that's the approach I think we need to have in Ireland. I made those comments before at a public meeting, and a former Secretary General of a government department was speaking after me, and he said, "Malcolm, what about the fourth approach? Beloved of public servants, we'll set up a review group." And I don't think that we really have time. I think that the challenge for us is about embracing these new technologies, but setting in place the guardrails to explore that. On the theme today, then, AI and education, this is going to be so important, but it's going to impact on every aspect of education. And I suppose this is where I throw out a lot of our questions. For us, we know that it's going to be a technology that is already hugely disruptive in the employment markets. In a previous life, I worked with the Higher Education Authority, and for a long period, all the stats used to show computer science graduates were the best employed, earn more even than those who were medicine graduates and so on. There's early evidence now that's already showing here that software engineers, that the unemployment rate is higher than the national average. So we're seeing in areas as well, like law and accountancy and so on, that there's already disruption. So we've got to look at, how do we upskill and reskill, and the role of the education system in being able to adapt to do that. How do we integrate it within the curriculum at primary, second level, and in tertiary level education? How do we carry out assessment? This is obviously, it's a key concern where there's a drive toward more project work. Is it appropriate for students to use large language models? How do students challenge in that space? So what is now going to be the role of the expert? I've been urging, and I think we do need to see from certainly the Department of Education, very clear guidelines for schools around the use of AI, the ethical use of AI, also in terms of training programs for teachers. A lot of teachers are already using it for lesson planning, so we do need to support schools. I do think there is a debate as well about the partnership between the education system and the companies that are providing some of the new technologies. I've been watching quite closely, as I'm sure many of you are aware, the partnership that's been entered into between the Estonian government and OpenAI with the rollout of ChatGPT, kind of almost a closed large language model, making it available to every 16 and 17-year-old in Estonia. They've just signed a partnership as well with Greece to do something similar. They're certainly interested in partnering with Ireland to do it. That leads to all sorts of questions around the extent to which we should partner, not just with OpenAI, but indeed with other companies. So with all of that, and I am happy if people do want to answer questions, but I have probably thrown out more questions than provided answers. But just to say thank you very much. I look forward to the deliberations of today informing our committee. But equally, I would challenge anyone here, if you have interesting views, if you have a perspective, if you want to challenge what we're doing as legislators, please do email those views forward. And I wish you very well today. Gurmagh.
Thank you very much, Deputy Byrne, for those remarks and indeed for those questions, which I think have set the table for us. There's so many to deliberate over. I'm now going to introduce the moderator for the keynote and for the first panel. Noel O'Connor is a full professor in the School of Electronic Engineering at Dublin City University. He is CEO of the Insight Research Ireland Centre for Data Analytics. And since 1999, he has published over 600 peer-reviewed publications, made 11 standards submissions, and filed 6 patents. Pretty remarkable. His commercial experience includes a successful spin-out company and mentorship of 2 others. He's an area editor for a number of scholarly journals in the field and has acted as general chair and program chair for many high-ranking conferences in the field of AI. Over to you. No.
Right. Thank you very much, Dan, for that introduction. Thank you to Dan and Fionnuala for the excellent preparation for today's event and the organisation today. I'm absolutely delighted and honoured to be here. I'm looking forward to a very exciting day of discussion. I'd like to thank Deputy Byrne for his comments and indeed the work of the Oireachtas Committee. It's extremely important for Ireland, I believe, for all the reasons that you mentioned. And I'd like to just assure you that you have the full support of the Insight and Adapt communities in your work. So do please call on us and leverage us as needed. And before I introduce the keynote speaker, a special word of thanks to Brian McNamee and Andrew Hines from the 2 centres who brought this event together and brought the community together, which again is really important in this ongoing work around AI, because we are a small country in Ireland, and I genuinely believe we are better together, and together we can accomplish fantastic things. I have the great honour of introducing our first keynote speaker this morning, Professor Wayne Holmes. Professor Holmes is a full professor of critical studies of artificial intelligence and education in the UCL Knowledge Lab at the University College of London. He holds a UNESCO Chair in the ethics of AI in education. He is also an associate professor, an adjunct professor at the University of Nova Gorica in Slovenia, and a foreign expert at Beijing Normal University in Zhuhai in China. He has been involved in education throughout his entire life, and he brings a critical studies perspective to the connection between AI and education and their ethical, human rights and social justice implications. So please, Professor Holmes, you're very welcome to the stage.
Firstly, I want to say thank you very much to the organisers for the invitation to be here today. I mean, you know, we're in the Royal Irish Academy. What could be better? And it's going on my CV for sure. So, as mentioned, my role is thinking about AI and education from a critical studies perspective. Now, the problem is that when I do that, people often think that I'm being a little bit critical. I like to think I'm being critical, but also constructive. And the reason is because that down there is me, and I'm against some really big, well-funded organizations. I don't have that money. So it's really important at times to really think very carefully about how we go forward. Another way of thinking about the same thing is, you know, I'm not against AI. But if that represents AI, then I'm the kind of the conscious and the background there to try and think, well, how can we make sure this happens better? So why should we be talking about AI in education at all? Well, a lot of things have been happening recently. A lot of ideas have been coming out. And we already have, some amazing things happening here where AI is being used to develop new pharmaceuticals. But we also have AI being looked at and saying, well, actually, all these promises are not happening. So here we have 95% of the organizations that MIT looked at have seen no benefit from the use of these technologies. So it's complex. At the same time, we have, this famous man talking about AI and talking about AI being in a bubble. And the thing we know about bubbles is that bubbles tend to burst. Are we in line for that to be happening? But what about AI in education? Why do we need to think about it here? Well, I argue that while we've been talking about technologies for an awful long time, AI is the first technology that is being sold to us as being human-like. It also appears pretty human-like, what it achieves, and it is often perceived by us as being human-like. And it's the first technology to really be in that kind of position, so we need to be really, really careful. We're always being told that AI, the best way of using AI is not to replace us, not to replace teachers, but to augment us. So we have this situation here where the horse's body represents the AI, but the control is the human torso and head, right? This is what we're told AI is really all about. The reality is that this is what we're getting. Well, actually, the technology itself and the way it's being used are very much more in control, and we need to be very careful about this. So we're here to talk about AI in education, and I'm really pleased that the title of this event is AI and Education. And AI in education, if you look up on the internet, the ways that we're talking about it, and there's a huge number of websites and ideas and ways in which it should happen. And many of them look like this. I don't know, those of you educators in the room, hopefully like me, you share that this is actually horrible. The idea that the students are sat there engaging one-on-one with their computers and the teacher is actually a virtual teacher on the screen. This is really quite worrying, but it is the picture being pushed all the time. And we have situations like this, again, another image created by AI, don't count the hands, where we're told that lots and lots of teachers are scared about AI and its impact it's having on the classroom. And I think they're right to be scared, but I think they're probably scared about the wrong things. So hopefully I'm going to pick up some of the things that I think they should be scared about. So the reason I think it's good that we're talking about AI and education is because the connections are much broader. And what I tend to do is to think about it in these two buckets. So the first bucket is teaching and learning with AI. So the use of AI technologies in classrooms, etc., using the AI to teach with. And that's often known as AI&ED. And in fact, the AI&ED research community have been around for 45 years. But the other aspect that often gets forgotten is teaching and learning about AI and the responsibility that we as educators have to make sure that young people and their teachers and their parents and society and our policymakers really do understand what this technology does, is capable of. So we call that AI literacy. I'll talk about AI&ED first of all. And then AI&ED can be broken down into three groups itself. Now, these always overlap. You can put one thing in many groups, but it's a useful, convenient thing to do. So we talk about institution-focused AI&ED, teacher-focused AI&ED, and student-focused AI&ED. So I'm going to run through those, not going to spend a lot of time, but here's some examples of institution-focused AI&ED. The use of AI to support admissions, course planning, school security, and so it goes on. Now, note, please, that there's 5 different types of AI being used in education, institution-focused. And what about teacher-focused? A whole range of things here: plagiarism detection, curation of learning materials, classroom monitoring, creating, etc., etc. So another, what is it? Another, I can't count, another 7. So up to 12 different types of AI being used in education. What about student-focused? It's a much longer list. Now, this is the stuff that's been researched for more than 40 years. All these different types of AI being used in education. If you look in the middle there, there's generative AI. Now, the reason we're all talking today is because of 2 years ago, or 3 years ago now, OpenAI launched ChatGPT. So generative AI is the thing of the moment. But the first thing I want you to take away from this, please, is that although thinking about generative AI's impact on education is important, it's only one part of a huge range of different ways in which AI is being used. So if you were my students, I'd go in to look at this in more detail, but you're lucky you're not, so I'm not going to. Instead, I'm going to try and look at this and burst this bubble a bit, and some of the things that we're being told and what they actually mean. So the first thing we're told is that AI saves teacher time. This is fantastic, right? It's going to save teachers' time because teachers' time is very valuable. I'm a teacher. I'd love to have my time saved. But actually, when you think about it more carefully, it really doesn't save teacher time. In fact, that claim about saving teacher time was around in the 1950s with B.F. Skinner. He developed his teaching machine and he said it was going to save teacher time. It didn't. No ed tech since then has genuinely saved teacher time. Instead, it tends to displace teacher time. So with generative AI, we tend to find ourselves, we have to write multiple prompts. You've all experienced this. And then we have to check and verify the outputs. You've all experienced this. And we have to manage the data. If you're a teacher, you need to think about privacy and all those other things. You need to think about the ethics. You need to think about student attempts to get around the system. So actually, this generative AI comes into the classroom and maybe it saves you a bit of time in one direction, but suddenly there's all these new activities you have to do. And not only that, if it is perceived as saving teacher time, particularly by school leadership, then there is an expectation upon you to do more. So instead of doing feedback once a week, now you're expected to do feedback 3 times a week because the technology makes it possible, theoretically. And if it does save teacher time, then policymakers close your eyes because this is the next logical step, right? We don't need teachers. We can automate teachers, as we saw in that first image. And you think, no, this is not going to happen. It is happening. Here's a school in Austin, Texas, where they don't have teachers. And you think, well, that's the crazy Americans in Austin, Texas. Well, there's crazy Americans elsewhere as well. And there's also some crazy people in the UK. So there are schools generally being set up today where they don't have teachers. The next thing we hear all the time, and this again goes back to B.F. Skinner, is that these technologies will personalize the learning. Just as we can personalize our selection of things to watch on Netflix, we can personalize our learning. This sounds fantastic. Everybody wants to personalize their learning. But the reality is it doesn't personalize the learning. It just takes everybody on these quasi-efficient routes and put them all in that same box. So we're not personalizing. It's not about enabling each child to self-actualize, personalizing to what they want to do and how they wish to develop. It's about homogenization of students, just doing it more efficiently. And it undermines things like collaboration, the social aspects of teaching and learning. Without this, then teaching and learning really doesn't exist. But I've been in so many classrooms, like that original picture where the students are focused on their computer, ignoring the child to the left, to the right, ignoring the teacher, because they're doing personalized learning. The problem also is that these tools can disempower teachers because the systems make decisions which are black box. The teacher can't find out what the decisions are or how they're being made. So the teachers themselves are having to hand over control to machines or to OpenAI, to Sam Altman, which I think is a hugely problematic thing. It used to say Zuckerberg, but now it's Sam Altman. But not only that, we don't even know the impact of these technologies on the developing cognition of young people. The reason for the picture of the sat-nav, I don't know if you're like me, but I use the sat-nav to get here. I find it very useful, but there is evidence that those of us who use sat-navs actually are less spatially aware than we used to be. Now, I'm not saying this is happening with children who are using AI technologies. What I'm saying is we do not know. So the use of these technologies in classrooms at the moment, we're experimenting on children. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm an academic. I like to experiment on children, but only under rigorous ethical controls that we have in universities. This is not happening with these technologies. We also hear that these technologies are good for exam monitoring. During the pandemic, lots of universities use these tools for e-proctoring. But we know they don't work. They're intrusive. For some people with darker skin tones than me, they didn't even recognize the person who was in the room. They undermine people who have mental health problems. There's a huge range of issues there. But not only that, it undermines child rights. Child rights are fundamentally important. They build on human rights. Child rights were not agreed until the 1970s, but they're very, very clear. The child right to dignity, to autonomy, to be heard, and so it goes on. I'll pick just a couple. So to be heard. Children in classrooms today where AI systems are being used often don't get a choice over whether they use the AI system, and certainly don't get a choice over what they learn. The system decides for them. So their voice is not being heard. But also look at the bottom one, to be protected from economic exploitation. Every one of these AI tools that we get in classrooms today extract data. Every time the child types, every time the child creates something, everything they say and do is extracted. Why? So that the company who owns the technology can improve the model that they're using. Why? So they can sell to more schools. So in other words, those young people, by definition, are working as unpaid labor for those big tech companies. I don't think that's right. The other thing we're seeing as well is the commercialization by stealth of education. Now, we tend to all agree that education is a common good. It doesn't matter whether you yourself have children, it's irrelevant. As a society, it's good for us as a society to make our children educated. But the problem is with the commercialization that's happening, because all these tools are commercial. It's a huge problem. And here's an example of this. So Byju's was an Indian company and was the first ed tech company to become a unicorn. It was worth more than $1 billion. You can see here, it was worth $22 billion at one point. They sponsored the World Soccer Cup, whatever it was called, at one point. They had so much money sloshing around. And across India, hundreds of thousands of schools, many, I lost track, lots of children, lots of teachers were really engaged in using Byju's. But then this happened. And the last time I heard about it, this happened. So the company's just gone. So all that effort, all that time, all spent on that company and their products is all gone because we allow the commercialization of education. But it's not only that. Today, with all of these technologies I've mentioned, we do not have robust, independent evidence at scale for the effectiveness, for the safety, or even for that have a positive impact on the classroom. So I reiterate, we do not have independent, robust evidence at scale. We have thousands of little studies, usually conducted by the developers of the technology. But that's not enough. We don't allow that in medicine. You don't go to your local pub and somebody says, hey, I found this new, well, most of us don't go to the local pub, and when this happens, you don't take a medicine from somebody in the local pub. We expect our medicines to have gone through rigorous testing. We expect them to be prescribed to us by experts. This doesn't happen with education technology, and it's not happening with AI-enabled education technology. Now, the other thing we hear all the time is that with the increased use of these technologies, we're actually exacerbating the digital divide. So the divide on the one hand from those young people who are from wealthier backgrounds have access to the technology, and those on the right-hand side who are from poorer backgrounds and don't have access to the technology. So therefore, the gap between these two groups is getting worse. This may be true, but you know me well enough now. It's not completely the situation, because what's happening, and we're seeing this already, is that the digital divide is flipping. And what I mean by that is that if you have money, you continue to have access to a human teacher. Whereas if you don't, increasingly you're going to have to depend upon an AI system. And this is increasingly happening. I got an email this morning about what's happening in Germany. It's happening there. We need to think about this rather more carefully. Okay, so that's bursting the bubble of that, but that's the AI-ED. So what about the AI literacy, teaching and learning about AI? Well, again, this can be broken down. work I'm doing at the moment, we break it into 3 dimensions: practical, technological, and human. So let's do a metaphor. So for me, if you want to learn how to use a car, you need to know that we've got to put petrol in the car, right? If you don't put petrol in the car, it doesn't work. Some people argue you really need to know something about how the actual engine works so that you can know how to do it and what happens when this, whatever. But we all probably agree that you need to understand the rules of the road before we let somebody out there. You need to understand what the signs mean and how to be protective of other road users. So let's swap that to AI. So just as we need to know about this, there's a lot of people out there. If you go on the web, and you'll find thousands of websites telling you how to use generative AI in classrooms. I think most of them are really worrying because they don't really understand generative AI, and they see it's a very instrumentalist approach. It's a tool. Who cares its background or what it does? If you want to understand how these tools work, then we need to understand about how AI works. So here's an example of how AI gets trained. So the mother is the trainer, the computer scientist, the baby is AI, and the father doing the car, that's the training data. And so the AI learns that's daddy. So then when they go to the next and the next, they see daddy. So this is how AI is trained, right? Obviously, it's a silly version, but the logic is absolutely accurate. Okay, so what about this kind of stuff, understanding the rules of the road? Well, I think it's really important that in AI, we do understand this kind of stuff. We do understand the way in which they're being used for facial recognition, being used in all the different ways. So that's what I'm going to focus on now. So what country is this? Thank you. So Holland is using as much energy as AI is using, or any other way. AI today uses as much energy as the entire country of the Netherlands. And it's predicted that within just a year or so, it's going to be using as much energy as India. Okay, it's a big numbers, right? What does it mean? Well, let's turn it around. So if you imagine that block represents the use of an LED light bulb in your ceiling for about a minute, if you do a Google search, it uses about the same kind of energy. You do a ChatGPT prompt, it uses a lot more. But you know, when you do a ChatGPT prompt, you don't just do it once. You do it again and again and again. So you're using this energy again and again and again. Now, who cares? Well, what we care about is the fact that this energy is now being used by these companies to do these things. And so it's not available for other things. And more than that, people recognize this. This is 3 Mile Island. You probably know the name. So this was the site of the first big nuclear meltdown situation in the US. Well, Microsoft have bought and are reopening this because Microsoft needs more electricity. I think that's worrying. And it's not just this, it's also the amount of water that's being consumed. So Microsoft alone, they use 6.4 million cubic meters of water. That's approximately equivalent to 2,500 Olympic swim pools. That's just one company. Now, again, that's just a big number, quite hard to understand a big number. So let's look at it this way. So here's an email generated using ChatGPT or one of them. And this is how much water it used to generate that one email, 300 milliliters of water. Now, of course, there are lots of studies and the number varies, but the 300 milliliters is the one that comes out most often. It doesn't really matter whether it's 300 millimeters, 100 milliliters. The point is, it's a lot of water. And this water is being consumed in the sense that it's being taken from the environment, it's being used by these service centers, and then it is no longer available to drink and no longer available for agriculture. It has to go through the whole processing again. But it's not just that, it's that they generate an awful lot of carbon dioxide as well. So the training of ChatGPT 3 generated as much carbon dioxide as it would if you drove a car from here to the moon and back. And I'm not talking about an electric car. A petrol car from here to the moon, that's a lot of carbon dioxide, and that's just one model. So let's focus down on Gen AI a little bit more closely. Now, we're in a lovely, august scientific building. And so the next image is going to make perfect sense. So this is an image generated using one of these tools. And the beauty of this is how quickly you can do this. So you can now use this image for training your teachers, your students, right? You want to look at anatomy. It's perfect. You use one of these tools. It generates an image. Fantastic. Anybody notice a problem? We only have 2 bones in our forearm, not 3. But does it not look credible? Does it not look amazing? And so this kind of image is being generated today by teachers around the world, and they're using it to share with their students, unless they are being really careful and critical themselves, which is a real burden. So this saving time is really worrying. We also heard, and we've heard this morning, that the tools are getting better and greater and whatever. But actually, when you look at it, the technology developments have not been as great as it appears they have been. What's been interesting is the developments have taken a long time. They've taken decades to get to where we are, not 2 or 3 years. Now, things are accelerating. We're kind of doing this. The big leap is not happening. But it does appear so. And the reason it appears so is because though the technology itself is not leaping forward, its application in multiple different places is leaping forward. And so the appearance to us is that things are changing rapidly. But actually, in terms of any innovation, things always seem to go quickly at the beginning, and they always seem to level out. And so we don't really know where we are at the moment, but it does appear in many respects that things are beginning to level out, that we're kind of hitting a developmental ceiling. And the only way we're going to move forward is if there is some kind of paradigmatic shift, a new approach. And there are people talking about this, but it's this illusion of thinking. And so here, they showed that the frontier LLMs, they actually collapse when they get to a certain level. So there are problems that are becoming more apparent all the time. Here's a writer off Twitter. They say it looks like progress, but it looks like a desperate attempt to mask technology with sheer size. So the ocean, if we just can make the models bigger and bigger and bigger, they're going to break down and get rid of all these problems that we know these technologies have. And there are others saying, no, we're going to do finer and finer and better. So it's a problematic area, but that development is not as fast as it might appear. And one of the things we keep telling teachers is that these tools can help you with your creativity. And I accept that in some senses, maybe that's true. So this picture represents, for me, the creativity of an individual teacher. And I acknowledge if they use one of these tools, it could well increase their creativity. But personally, as a researcher, I'm not interested in one teacher. I'm interested in all teachers. So this picture represents the creativity of all teachers. The problem is that if they use these tools, their creativity comes back to this. And you know this is not true. Colleagues at the United Nations in New York, they do projects with young people, and they put out these forms for young people to fill in demographics and 3 questions. Today, they are finding that the answers they're getting to those 3 open questions are the same. Not similar, are the same. From South America, from Africa, from Oceania, from East Asia, the answers are the same. So that for the individual, hey, I've got a new answer, this is fantastic. But for everybody, this is a problem. One of the other things we hear a lot is these tools are fantastic because they help us with things like syntheses and summaries, etc. So I explored this. So this is a report I did a couple of years ago, and I put this bit of text and I put it into one of the tools. I said, summarize the text, and it came up with this. And I think this is impressive. That's pretty good. But being me, I said, do it again. And it came up with this. I said, do it again. It came up with this, do it again, do it again. And point being is that every single time I told it to do this, it came up with a different answer. Now, if you're a student or a young person or someone who's not thinking this through, you see the first one and you think, I've got the summary. but you haven't got the summary. You've got a summary, one of many possible summaries. I'm not saying it's not useful. I'm saying we need to really understand the differences here. We're also told that these tools are there to help young people do things. But actually what's happening is that students are being accused of using these tools today when they haven't even used the tools today. So we have a real problem in academia. How do we do assessment? How do we understand this? How do we work out? So 3 years ago, they were stressed about their exams, about turning up on time, about eating, about entertainment. Today, they're stressed about all those things, but they're also stressed about the Gen AI. Should I avoid it? If I don't avoid it, will I be accused of cheating? If I do avoid it, will I fall behind my peers? If I do avoid it, will I be accused of using it anyway? But not only that, we're also over-relying. Students are beginning to over-rely on these tools. So there was a study done by a group of people who love GPT, and they thought, we want to show how well that using GPT works for students and their learning. So they did this study. 2 groups, lovely RCT. One group have the access to the tool, one group did not. And they showed clearly that the access to GPT-4 improves performance. So they were very pleased. But they were good researchers and they kept it going. And then they discovered this. When the GPT was taken away from the students who had access to it before, those students fell behind the students who never had access to it in the first place. This is not me saying we should prevent students having access to it. It's me saying we don't understand this enough. We need to understand what are these impacts. I like to summarize generative AI with this image. It seems to me to make sense. And I would argue that Gen AI output, the problem is it looks human-like, but it isn't. It looks accurate, but it isn't. It looks definitive, but it isn't. It looks intelligent, but it isn't. And it looks as if it understands, but it doesn't. And I think it's important that our young people and our teachers understand this before they use these tools. For me, this represents the complexity of the world. It's a very simple complexity of the world, but you get what I mean. And what our students and teachers need to know is that the outcome of using generative AI, what generative AI does by definition, is it takes this amazing complexity and turns it into this kind of mush color. It averages everything out. And so subtle, nuanced ideas get hidden, get lost when these tools are involved. And one of the outcomes of that is it disempowers voices that are already disempowered, because their voices are always the smaller voices and they get hidden and put to one side. And if you think about it, innovation, when it starts, is always the small voice. It can get put to one side. And it forgets the role of other people in order to make these technologies work. So generative AI, ChatGPT, was trained. The guardrails were put up by workers in places like Kenya and Venezuela who were profoundly badly paid, who saw some disgusting outputs that they then prevented us seeing. We need to think about this. Our teachers and our students need to understand this before they make a decision as to whether, when, and how to use these technologies. So, in conclusion then, and thank you very much for listening to me this far, in conclusion, the thing about understanding AI is that we need to understand the whole picture. And the reality is that AI looks amazing. I am so impressed with what our colleagues, our engineering colleagues, have achieved to make this stuff work. It is amazing. But we need to have the full picture. And the full picture is not as straightforward as represented to us. Here's another way of saying the same thing. Some of you know this. This is the original Amazon Turk. So that is a robot, essentially a machine. And this toured the courts of Europe in the 18th century, playing chess. And it looked amazing, and people were bowled over by it. And some very famous people played it and were beaten at chess. So it looks amazing. But the reality was inside there was a human. We need to understand this difference between the reality and the appearance. They're not the same thing. And I kind of suspect that in the world of AI, we're kind of like this. from the 1950s, doctors saying, you're feeling a bit stressed, have a cigarette. Well, now in the situation today, you want to speed up, you want to save some time, use Gen AI. It's because it's still early and new and we don't really understand it. And it looks exciting, right? It's like that lake. You look at that lake, you think, I would love to jump into that lake. But I suspect most of you in this room would not jump into that lake until you knew what was underneath the surface. At the moment, most people do not understand what's underneath the surface of AI. So I argue for two things. We need a top-down approach. We need regulation. And this is something I'm involved in at the Council of Europe. We are developing a legal instrument to regulate the use of AI in educational settings. As you can imagine, it's wading through glue. It's very time-consuming, very difficult, but we shall see how that progresses. But I don't think that's enough. We also need from the bottom up. We need critical AI literacy. We need people to understand what AI actually is, not what it appears like, but what it actually is, how it actually works, what its actual impacts are. And we do that in terms of the technology and the practical, but we particularly do it in terms of the human impacts. What is the impact of these technologies on us as people, on our relationships, on human rights, on the environment, and so on and so on. So, in my opinion, if you're not literate in the human dimension of AI, then you're not AI literate. And if a teacher is not AI literate, then they're not able to make informed decisions about whether, where, and when to use AI in education. So that's it for me. Thank you. And I'm really pleased to be part of this.